On February 8, 1898, Guatemala would forever see a new brand of darkness that was in the shade of yellow. That day, the democratically elected president, Brianna Barrios, was assassinated by a British Minuteman, and thereafter was an urgent meeting on who could take his place. Casting a shadow through the doorway, 44-year-old Manuel Cabrera exclaimed, "Gentlemen, let me please sign this decree. As first designated, you must hand me the presidency." Okay, sure, yeah. What could go wrong, they said. During Manuel's rule, the United Fruit Company, which is an American company, made an offer that he could not refuse. "Wow, gee, Senor Cabrera, you're so close to the equator. We'd love to help you make Guatemala a better place with a much more modern infrastructure. Tell you what, give us some land grants and exempt our taxes, and we'll not only build railroads, highways, and seaports, but we'll ensure that you never lose an election." And sure enough, the United Fruit Company had a monopoly on Guatemala's infrastructure as well as the political system within the country. Under Cabrera, workers were forced into the United Fruit in exchange for railways and roads that were used by United Fruit or otherwise their workers. Essentially, the country of Guatemala was literally designed specifically to give profit to the United Fruit Company because the infrastructure systemically was designed to go to United Fruit faculties, as United Fruit served as an economic host, thus making their business run more efficiently rather than make the country itself better. Sure, they had their own roads and railways, but what if they wanted to live off the grid? What if they wanted a bigger wage instead of the less than a penny an hour wage? What if they wanted to put their work into their own farms and their own towns and villages and cities and etc.? Of course, these were the thoughts and opinions of the Guatemalan people. So the United Fruit Company and Cabrera set up a network of spies that would hunt down anyone who opposed the new economic system, anyone who advocated for a better wage, collectivized farming, or simply undermined the United Fruit and Cabrera. Activists were usually executed, and their families would be sent to prison camps to be tortured. The United States also threatened to implement military intervention if the population totally organized and attempted to overthrow Cabrera. Cabrera's rule ended in 1920, where he was kicked out on the terms of corruption. So does that mean that United Fruit is finally out of the picture and the peasants can finally rebuild their country in a more democratic fashion? No. Because of the constant bloodshed and witch hunt to those who opposed the neoliberal system enforced by United Fruit, the people mostly elected fascists for the next decade. Essentially, there has not been any democracy in Guatemala. To drive this point further, Jorge Ubico won an election in 1931, where he was the only person on the ballot. This man was so insane that he literally viewed himself as a reincarnation of Napoleon Bonaparte, with paintings and statues of Napoleon in his workspace, and even referred to himself as the little Napoleon of the tropics. This delusional and narcissistic mentality would eventually lead him to become one of the most brutally repressive dictators in Latin America. He was staunchly anti-communist. He militarized the fuck out of Guatemala's infrastructure. He destroyed labor unions and killed union workers, all with the help of U.S. support. Yes, the U.S. was back in action and also made the same deal with Ubico as they did with Cabrera. See, Ubico would go on to allow the United States to build military bases in Guatemala and would grant hundreds of thousands of acres of land to the United Fruit Company, effectively turning Guatemala and its economy into a feudalistic plutocracy. He also implemented vagrancy laws, where indigenous workers were forced to work a certain number of hours in order to maintain an equal amount of workers between landowners. If one of these indigenous workers decided that they no longer wanted to work on privatized land, Ubico established Decree 1816, which granted landowners the right to shoot and kill any farmer that didn't want to comply with the new law. Yeah. 14 years later, Ubico was overthrown, and Guatemala finally had its first democratically elected leader, known as Juan José Arevalo. Though he was a reformist, he was also a member of the Revolution Action Party. Because of his juxtaposed inconsistencies, he did maintain the economic structure that Ubico has cursed the peasant workers with, but he also raised minimum wage and set up literacy programs. This would lead to labor unions forming in Guatemala once again. Kind of like a breath of fresh air. Now, you would think that the United States and United Fruit would be shitting themselves over this, and not only would you be right, but you wouldn't even be scratching the surface. The United States has attempted to assassinate Arevalo in a military coup 25 fucking times and failed each time. In 1951, Arevalo stepped down and handed his position to Jacobo Arbenz, who was basically continuing what Arevalo was doing by expanding suffrage and providing access to education. He also implemented Decree 900 in 1952, which redistributed 1,500,000 acres of land back to peasant families and workers. This, of course, didn't really appeal to the United Fruit Company and the United States.
God damn it! I wish we were still doing business with Ubico! We were doing so well until that fucking Arevalo scumbag and that Arbenz smut took over and ruined everything for us. We gave them roads, railways, telephones, and even a few pennies. Mr. Eisenhower, is there anything you can do to help us?
Well, what's in it for me?
Well, it seems that we're losing a grip with settling in Guatemala.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So what?
Well, we wouldn't want a bunch of commies on our side of the hemisphere, right?
You didn't just say!
Yes. I have intelligence that Arbenz is a sympathizing pinko.
Don't be ridiculous!
Okay, but mark my words. I am certain that your presidency won't look good considering you took office just recently. I'm sure that you do not want McCarthy to find out that fucking commies are taking back Guatemala.
God damn it! Come on, pick up already.
Hello?
Mr. Bernays, I need your help!
After this conversation, Eisenhower ordered the CIA, with the help of Edward Bernays, to create propaganda in the United States and Guatemala, claiming that because of Arbenz's decolonization and resistance to the United Fruit Company, the country was going to become a puppet state for the Soviet Union as a secret base in order to attack the United States. This was to paint Arbenz as a dirty communist in both countries, thus forcing him to resign.
Peace comes to Guatemala. For the first time in 10 years, the people of Guatemala are breathing the sweet air of liberty.
In 1954, the CIA went into Guatemala and overthrew the country in a bloody military coup called Operation PB Success, and they appointed Carlos Castillo Armas in place of Arbenz. To summarize, when Richard Nixon came over for a visit in 1955, he described Armas's political rule as such.
This is the first instance in history where a communist government has been replaced by a free one.
Nixon was referring to the National Committee of Defense Against Communism, which was created by Armas with the help of $90 million from the United States government. With this committee, they forced the peasants out of their newly acquired land, destroying Arbenz's Decree 900 in the process, gutted the government of any politicians who even had sympathies with left-wing political ideologies for anything of that matter, attacked labor unions, Popular Association and left-wing political parties destroyed the literacy program and made it illegal for illiterate people to vote, which was most of the population at the time, and resurrected the secret police that existed under Ubico. But hey, they were breathing the sweet air of liberty, right? Now, Armas was assassinated in 1957, but that didn't stop other dictators from taking his place for several terms to come. The thing you have to understand is that these upcoming politicians were trained at a place in the state of Georgia known as the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, formerly known as the U.S. Army School of the Americas. This school was set up by the CIA with the sole purpose of providing anti-communist military training specifically for Latin American military personnel. One of the people who has also graduated from this school was none other than Augusto Pinochet, one of the sickest and most vile fascist dictators in Latin American history, who is also known for his creatively horrifying torture methods, such as electrocution to the genitals, watching and hearing your friends being tortured to death, and rape with the use of rodents and insects. Yes, this school taught Pinochet these techniques, and the kinds of people that were running Guatemala after the assassination of Armas were collectively just like him, if not worse. So basically, the United Fruit Company and Standard Fruit essentially owned Guatemala, all of the land, until 1996. Meanwhile, in 1976, however, the CEO of the United Fruit Company decided that he didn't like being known as an investor into the Banana Republic in Guatemala and the rest of the surrounding countries in Latin America, so he jumped out of the window and killed himself. The company later changed their name to Chiquita Banana. Later on, Standard Fruit changed their name to Dole Fruit Company. If you're wondering why these names sound so familiar, that's because the same companies that exploited the people of Latin America, ridding them of genuine democracy, torturing anyone who opposed them, made deals with shady politicians and manipulated the weak ones, and gutting peasants of their own land, income, and education for all of 95 years straight, are the same corporations who sell you fucking bananas in your grocery store. But hey, Bill Clinton said he was sorry that all of that happened. I mean, it's not like him and his wife weren't tied to anything else like it, like a certain pipeline in North Dakota, and in 2012, Hillary threatened military intervention if El Salvador didn't come up with a privatization plan because it violated the Central American Free Trade Agreement. So that apology was totally sincere. Okay, fine. Sarcasm aside. But of course, why would the Clintons, petite bourgeois neoliberals, why would they care in the first place? When capitalism has gone full fucking bananas, the rich get richer and the poor stay poorer, almost always through monopolized violence and lies. Imagine what would have happened if Arevalo were to have totally kicked out United Fruit out of Latin America for good. And of course they would have lost their infrastructure, but if he and Arbenz truly were communists, then in the spirit of Karl Marx, the only thing the Guatemalan people had to lose was their chains.